Hi, my name is Liza, I'm 31. And the night everything changed, I was standing behind the bar while a group of people I'd known for years laughed at me like I wasn't even human. One of them used to be a close friend, and she said something that still echoes in my head. I didn't know that moment would push me toward the biggest twist of my life. Tell me where you're watching from. And subscribe for more stories about revenge and emotional courage. I still remember the exact moment their laughter stopped feeling like background noise and started feeling like a weight sitting on my chest. It was a Tuesday, one of those slow, predictable evenings at Mason's Tap House in Toledo, Ohio. The kind of night where the lights hum, the ice melts too fast in the bins, and you know the same regulars will walk in, sit in their usual spots, and say the same predictable things. But that night, something inside me shifted. I was wiping down the counter when I heard the first chuckle. First, I didn't even look up. Laughter wasn't unusual there. People joked, talked big, tried to impress someone new. But then I heard my name soft, dragged out. The way someone says a name when they're about to make fun of it. Lizie. The voice belonged to someone I'd once trusted more than I should have, Maddie, a coworker who used to cover my shifts when my mom was sick. Now she barely said hello unless she needed something. Somewhere along the way, she discovered that putting me down got her attention. And attention was her favorite thing. What? I asked, pretending I didn't hear the sharp tone. I kept wiping, hoping to dodge whatever was coming. But the table near the jukebox erupted into full laughter. That loud, careless, cutting kind of laughter that makes you feel like your skin is too thin. 3 guys we served almost every night leaned back in their chairs, grinning like they caught someone slipping on ice. She actually thinks this job is going somewhere, one of them said. I didn't catch his name, though by then I'd been serving him for nearly 2 years. He was the type who never learned servers' names but expected us to remember his exact drink order. I wish I could say I didn't care. I wish I could say I'd grown used to it. But something about that moment dug deeper than usual. Maybe because everything in my life already felt fragile back then. My mom's medical bills. My stalled plans to go back to school. My car making that awful clicking noise every morning. It all made me feel like I was one step away from falling apart. Their laughter found that crack. I swallowed hard and kept wiping the counter, hoping they'd forget about me. But then Maddie leaned forward, her voice loud enough to travel across the bar. Come on, guys, she said with a smirk. Be nice. Liza's got goals. She wants to. What was it again? Save up to buy a. She didn't finish her sentence. She didn't need to. The way they burst into laughter again told me everything. My throat tightened. The rag in my hand froze. I felt every pair of eyes in the room shift toward me, waiting for a reaction, like I was some kind of entertainment. The worst part? I used to tell Maddie my dreams. I trusted her with things I barely admitted to myself. I once said I wanted to start a small side business, maybe a coffee cart, maybe a brunch pop-up. Something that belonged to me. Something that made me feel like my life wasn't stuck on repeat. But now she was using that dream to get a laugh. I stepped back and pretended to reorganize the glasses behind the counter. Anything to give myself a few seconds to breathe. But even from the back wall I heard everything. Imagine her running a business, one guy snorted. She can barely handle a bar shift, another added. Probably thinks she'll own this place one day, someone else chimed in. That line hit me harder than they knew. Because yes, deep down, owning a place someday was a dream I kept buried so far inside I barely acknowledged it. So hearing it mocked out loud made me feel exposed, like someone had reached into my chest and pulled out the one thing I kept safe. Even so, I stayed quiet. My mom always said, not everything needs your reaction. But she also wasn't standing in my shoes that night, trying to hold back tears while pouring drinks for people who saw me as nothing more than a moving part behind a counter. When the next customer walked up, I forced a smile. What can I get for you? My voice shook slightly and I hoped he didn't notice. The man, probably in his 60s, gave me a gentle look. He ordered a ginger ale and tipped me $5 on a $2 drink. When I handed him his change, he didn't take it. Instead, he said softly, "Don't let people with loud mouths make you feel small." Then he walked away. It was such a small moment, but it stuck to me like a reminder that not everyone in that room was laughing. Still, the humiliation hung in the air like smoke. Thick, heavy, impossible to escape. Later in the evening, Maddie came behind the bar to refill her water bottle. She leaned close enough for me to smell her peppermint gum. "You okay?" she asked, voice dripping with fake concern. I didn't look at her. "Fine." "Oh good," she said lightly. "Because you looked like you were gonna tear up earlier." I didn't answer. I just kept slicing lemons. She didn't walk away. "Hey," she continued, twirling her hair around her finger. "Don't take stuff so seriously. They were just joking." "About me," I muttered. "Yeah, but," she shrugged. "It's a bar. People joke around." Then she added almost under her breath. "I mean, if you can't handle it, maybe you're in the wrong job." That one landed hard. I set the knife down slowly, carefully. My fingers trembled, but I forced them to stay steady. And then she walked away, humming, as if she hadn't just cut into me deeper than the blade ever could. The rest of my shift crawled by. Every laugh felt like it was aimed at me. Every whisper seemed suspicious. Even when a couple at the bar complimented my service, I barely heard them through the thick fog of embarrassment. But here's the strange thing. It wasn't just their words. It was the fact that this wasn't new. Their comments didn't appear out of nowhere. They were the final drop after years of snide remarks, eye rolls. "You're still here." Jokes and little digs people thought I didn't notice. Working as a bartender isn't shameful. I know that now. But back then, surrounded by people who treated me like I was stuck at the bottom of the ladder, it was hard to hold on to that truth. And that Tuesday night became the moment I realized something had to change. Not all at once. Not some sudden explosion of confidence. But something inside me cracked. After closing, I took the trash out back and leaned against the wall, staring up at the dark, cloudy sky. The cool air hit my face and I finally let out a long, shaky breath I'd been holding in for hours. I wasn't angry yet. Not then. I was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of shrugging off comments. Tired of carrying the weight of other people's opinions around like a heavy coat. For the first time in years, I asked myself a simple question. Is this how I want to spend the rest of my life? The answer was quiet but clear. No. And even though I didn't know it yet, that moment, standing alone behind the bar in the cold night air, was the first step toward a transformation none of them would ever see coming. Their laughter didn't break me, sparked me. That night, after I finally walked back inside from the cold alley, I felt a strange stillness settle inside me. Not peace, not clarity, just a quiet awareness that something had shifted. It was like my heart had drawn a line in the sand, even if my mind hadn't figured out how to follow it yet. I washed my hands, tied my apron again, and stepped back behind the counter. The bar felt louder than usual, like every sound was turned up just a little too high. The clinking glasses, the chair legs scraping the floor, even the low rumble of the heating unit in the ceiling. Everything felt sharper, like the whole room was paying attention to me whether it wanted to or not. I tried to focus on closing duties, but my thoughts kept drifting. Every time I blinked, I saw Maddie's smirk. Every laugh from a table made my stomach tighten. Even if it had nothing to do with me, I wanted to disappear. Just finish the shift and go home. But the night wasn't done with me yet. Around 1:40 a.m., just as we were getting ready to shut the doors, a group of college kids came rushing in. The kind of group that arrives already loud, already wound up, already convinced they're the most interesting people alive. Maddie rolled her eyes as she flipped the open sign to closed. "We're not taking any more people," she called out. But they were already at the bar, laughing like the rules didn't apply to them. One guy leaned over the counter, tapping the wood like he was calling a dog. "Hey," he said in a stretched out tone. "You still open?" I gave him the polite, tired smile I'd mastered. "We're closed for the night." "Sorry." He blinked dramatically. "Come on. Just a round of shots." Maddie crossed her arms. "Doors locked for a reason." The guy ignored her and pointed at me. "How about you? You're nicer. You look like you need the tips." His friends cracked up. I felt heat rush to my face. Not embarrassment this time. More like exhaustion mixed with something that tasted a little bit like anger. But I kept my voice steady. "We're closed. Please come back tomorrow." One of the girls in the group leaned forward, eyes half-lidded, and whispered something to the guy. He grinned wider. Then he reached for one of the unused bar menus sitting on the counter. And that's when it happened. He pulled a pen from his pocket, scribbled something across the back of the menu, flipped it toward me and said, "Here's your tip." The group roared with laughter before they even left the bar. The door swung shut behind them, and the sudden quiet felt like someone had pressed mute on the world. I didn't want to look at the menu. My hands were stiff at my sides. But something in me needed to know. Picked it up. Written in thick black ink were 4 words. Dream smaller, bartender girl. The letters were big. Careless. Cruel in that casual way only strangers can be. My throat closed. For a moment all I saw was white, like my mind was trying to block out the sting of the words. Maddie glanced over my shoulder. She laughed under her breath. Well, they're not wrong, she said lightly. That was when my hands started shaking. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the menu across the room like I wanted to. I just quietly walked to the back storage room and closed the door behind me. The second the latch clicked, something inside me snapped in a way I couldn't fully explain. The room felt darker, colder. The shelves stacked with liquor boxes and napkin packs suddenly looked like walls closing in around me. I leaned my back against the door and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. For the first time in a long time, I didn't tell myself to calm down. I didn't try to swallow the feeling or pretend the words didn't hurt. I let myself feel the full weight of everything, the laughter, the judgment, the being treated like I was less than. Like my life was a joke. Like my dreams were ridiculous. Like wanting more was a weakness. I buried my face in my hands and whispered to myself, "Why is everyone so mean?" The question came out of me so quietly it felt like a secret, and yet it hung in the air with a clarity that startled me. I didn't know how long I sat there. Maybe a few minutes. Maybe longer. But eventually I heard footsteps approaching the door. Then Maddie's voice. "You done hiding? We still have closing bags to count." It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the tone. Cold. Sharp. Impatient. Like I was a burden to her. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my shirt, took a slow breath and stood up. When I opened the door, she was leaning against the wall, arms folded, eyes narrowed in her usual half-smile. "You're really sensitive tonight," she said. I didn't answer. I just walked past her. The shift had taken enough from me already. When I reached the front counter, I saw the bar owner, Mr. Sanders, standing near the cash register. He was an older man with thinning gray hair, a belly that pushed against his plaid shirts, and a tired expression that never quite left his face. "Everything all right?" he asked, frowning slightly. I hesitated, the menu still in my hand. I wondered if I should tell him what the college kids wrote. But then I remembered all the other times people treated me badly while he looked the other way. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm fine." He gave me a doubtful look but didn't push. Instead, he pulled out the nightly deposit bag and sighed. "This place. It's getting harder to keep running," he muttered. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure what he expected me to say. Then Maddie chimed in. "You keep saying that, but you never actually do anything about it." Mr. Sanders shot her a look. "I'm just saying things aren't the same anymore." That sentence hung in the air in a strange way, like it carried more meaning than he was willing to explain. He shuffled around for a few minutes, gathering paperwork, and then headed toward his office. Before he closed the door, he turned back. "Liza, come see me before you leave." My stomach tensed. I'd never been called into his office like that. As he disappeared inside, Maddie let out a low whistle. "Wow. What did you do?" "Nothing," I answered. But even I didn't fully believe that. I finished counting the drawer, printed the closing reports, and took a moment to breathe before knocking on the office door. When I walked in, Mr. Sanders was sitting at his desk, rubbing his temples. "Close the door," he said. I did. He gestured for me to sit. The chair creaked under me as I lowered myself into it. The room smelled like old paper and the faint scent of fried food drifting in from the kitchen. "You okay tonight?" he asked again, more seriously this time. "I'm fine," I repeated. "It's just been a long shift." He nodded slowly. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of envelopes, white, crinkled slightly, clearly old. "These are yours," he said. I stared. "Mine." He pushed them toward me. "Your mom dropped these off months ago. Said they were important papers of your father's. I kept forgetting to give them back to you." My breath caught. My father's papers? I reached out slowly, the envelopes feeling heavier than they should. My dad had passed when I was 15, and anything connected to him always stirred something deep in me. Love, grief, longing, regret. I didn't mean to keep them from you, he added. Life just gets busy. I swallowed. Thank you for giving them to me now. He nodded and leaned back in his chair. For a moment, his tired eyes softened. You work hard, Liza. Don't let people walk over you. I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't used to anyone telling me that. As I stood to leave, he said one more thing. And take some time this week to think about what you want. Really want. I glanced back at him, confused. But he only waved me off like the conversation was over. When I walked out of the office, the bar was empty. The lights were dimmed. Maddie was gone without saying goodbye. I grabbed my coat, held the stack of envelopes to my chest, and walked out into the cold early morning air. The night felt heavier than any shift I'd ever had. Yet something inside me felt strangely awake. Not calm, not okay, but awake. Like something had cracked open, and now there was no going back. And as I walked across the parking lot, clutching my father's forgotten papers, I realized this. Tonight wasn't just a bad shift. It was the night something in me finally broke, so something else could finally begin. I was stacking glasses behind the bar when the first hint of opportunity arrived. Not as a grand announcement, not as a life-altering telegram, but as a casual comment from an older customer I had known for years. Mr. Benson, a retired businessman with a keen eye for numbers and an uncanny sense of timing, leaned in over the counter and said, Liza, you ever thought about owning this place? You've got the skill and clearly the heart for it. I laughed it off at first, brushing it aside as a polite exaggeration. Ownership? Me? I could barely afford my own apartment, let alone a business. But something in his tone lingered in my mind long after he had left. There was a seriousness in his gaze, a quiet certainty that made me question why I had never considered it before. For days I went about my usual routine, pouring drinks and tidying tables, yet the thought refused to leave me. Every time I organized the shelves or balanced a tray of glasses, I imagined what it would feel like to be in charge. To be the one making decisions, setting the rules, creating an environment where respect wasn't optional but mandatory. The idea felt impossible, yet tantalizingly close, like a door I hadn't noticed in a familiar hallway. The chance came sooner than I expected. One evening, after the bar had emptied and the hum of neon lights filled the quiet room, Mr. Benson returned. He leaned against the counter, this time with an envelope in hand. I've been watching you, Liza, he said, his voice low but firm. I see someone who works hard, who handles stress like a pro, who treats people fairly even when they don't deserve it. I'm retiring, and I want someone I can trust to take over this place. I thought of you. My stomach dropped. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. You mean me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes, he said, nodding. I can help you get started. I know it sounds crazy, but I want this bar in good hands and I think you're ready. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The idea seemed unreal. My life had been a series of small struggles, being laughed at, belittled, overlooked. And here in my hands was a chance to turn everything around. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sank onto a bar stool, staring at the worn wood beneath my hands, imagining the possibilities and the responsibilities that came with them. Over the next few days, I began to research what ownership would mean. I stayed late at the bar, poring over business books, reading contracts, and making notes about licenses, permits, and finances. Each page was a reminder of how little I had known, but also of how much I had learned simply by surviving behind this counter. Every order I had taken, every difficult customer I had managed, every small negotiation over a spilled drink or a tipped glass, all of it had prepared me for this moment. I remember one night vividly, sitting alone with a stack of papers and a pen. The bar was empty, the neon lights casting long shadows across the floor. I wrote down my fears. Not enough money, not enough experience, staff who might resist change. Then I wrote down my strengths. Resilience, knowledge of the bar, respect from certain regulars, and above all, determination. When I looked at the two lists side by side, one glaring truth stood out. My strengths outweighed my fears if I was willing to take the leap. The next step was the hardest, convincing my family and closest friends that this wasn't a whim. My mother, ever practical, was skeptical. Liza, this is a huge responsibility. Are you sure you're ready? It's not just about pouring drinks. It's payroll, maintenance, taxes, everything. I know, Mom, I said, my voice steady. But I've worked here long enough to know every inch of this place. I know the people. I know the rhythm. And I'm not doing it just for me. I'm doing it for everyone who's ever been treated like they don't belong. Her eyes softened, a flicker of pride mingling with concern. Then I'll support you, she said. But you have to promise me you'll be careful. Promised. And in that promise I felt the first real surge of confidence. This was no longer a dream, it was a possibility I could shape one decision at a time. The following week, I met with Mr. Benson again to go over the terms. The contract was straightforward but binding. I had to secure a loan, provide a detailed plan for staffing and operations, and ensure that the transition would be smooth. I spent nights drafting schedules, researching local laws, and calculating budgets down to the last penny. It was grueling but exhilarating. Every hurdle felt like proof that I was capable of more than anyone, including myself, had ever thought. There were moments of doubt, of course. One evening, after a particularly long day balancing paperwork and bar duties, I sat on the curb outside, feeling the weight of it all. My hands were sore, my head throbbed, and the fear of failure crept in like a shadow. But then I thought of every time I had endured ridicule without giving up. If I had survived that, I could survive this. I could make this work. The turning point came when I received the bank approval. I held the letter in my hands, trembling. The weight of the reality settled on me. This was no longer a possibility, a dream or a vague hope. This was real. The bar, the place that had been a daily battleground of whispers and sneers, was now within my reach. I could finally step into a role I had never imagined, and claim a place I had always deserved. I remember walking through the bar that night, alone, imagining the possibilities. I pictured the staff, the regulars, the tables and chairs, the bar top polished to perfection. I imagined the first day I would officially own the place, the first day I could set the rules, shape the culture, and ensure that no one would ever again be treated the way I had been. Every detail, from the placement of chairs to the organization of the back bar, felt like a brushstroke on a canvas I had longed to paint. And yet I didn't rush. I took my time, savoring the quiet moment of anticipation, the thrill of knowing that in just a short while everything would change. I allowed myself to imagine the reactions, the surprise, the shock, the eventual respect. I didn't crave revenge, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing that those who had doubted me would finally see the truth. The final preparations were meticulous. I met with accountants, suppliers, and legal advisors. I finalized staffing changes, identifying who would stay, who might leave, and who would need guidance under the new management. Every choice was deliberate, measured, and fair. I didn't want to wield power impulsively. I wanted to set a tone of integrity and respect from day one. One afternoon, as I walked the bar to inspect renovations, Maddie passed me a note, an old prank from months ago. Normally, I might have crumpled it in frustration, but now I simply smiled. The past no longer held the power to unsettle me. I tucked the note into my pocket, a reminder of the journey I had traveled and the strength I had cultivated along the way. Finally, the day arrived. I stood at the entrance, documents in hand, heart steady despite the adrenaline. This was it, the moment I had worked toward, prayed for, and meticulously prepared. I was about to walk into the bar not as the bartender who had endured ridicule, but as the owner, the one with authority, vision, and control. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and pushed the door open. The familiar smells of polished wood, lemon cleaner, and faint beer foam greeted me, but I noticed them anew. Everything looked familiar, yet everything had a new significance. I was no longer just part of the scene, I was the one shaping it. The first glance at Maddie and the staff was telling. Their chatter faltered. Their smiles were cautious. They didn't know yet, but they would soon. And when that realization hit, the change would be undeniable, permanent. Because sometimes life doesn't hand you opportunities on a silver platter. Sometimes you have to notice the door before it closes, gather every ounce of courage, and step through it without hesitation. And sometimes when you do, the life you thought you couldn't have suddenly becomes possible. The morning sun cut through the blinds of my small apartment in thin, bright stripes, painting the hardwood floor in lines of golden shadow. I dressed carefully, deliberately choosing a simple shirt and jeans, nothing flashy, Nothing that would draw attention. Today, my presence at the bar had to be unnoticed enough to let the room settle into its usual rhythm before I revealed the truth. I took a deep breath and clutched the folder of signed documents in my hands. The papers inside were more than just ink on legal stationery. They were the key to reclaiming not just a business, but a life that had been mocked and overlooked for years. Walking into Mason's Tap House, I felt the familiar creak of the floor under my sneakers, the smell of aged wood, spilt beer, and the faint tang of lemon cleaning solution greeted me like an old friend. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. I was no longer just Liza, the girl behind the bar. Today, I carried the weight of ownership, of validation, of quiet triumph in the face of the people who had doubted me. I kept my head down and moved through the front door, as if I were just another early employee arriving for a morning shift. Maddie was already there, wiping down tables, hair tied back in her usual careless bun. Her eyes flicked toward me, and I caught that familiar smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. The same look she had worn for months whenever she thought she had the upper hand. Today I let her stare. Let her assume that nothing had changed. The back office smelled faintly of the leftover pizza from last night, and the paper stacks that always seemed to be teetering on the edge of collapse. I paused for a moment, just long enough to feel the adrenaline coiling in my stomach, before stepping behind the counter. The regulars had begun to trickle in. Faces I recognized, voices that once grated on my patience, people who had never respected the woman standing before them. Yet I didn't acknowledge them. I didn't react. I moved with quiet, deliberate motions, arranging the napkins, checking the ice bins, keeping my calm as if nothing extraordinary was about to happen. From the corner of my eye, I saw Maddie glance at the time. Something passed across her face, hesitation? Suspicion? She caught herself before I could be sure. Her posture stiffened ever so slightly. The careless confidence I had seen every day replaced by a subtle uncertainty. It thrilled me to see her like this, to witness the first tiny ripple of anxiety cross the surface of her usual bravado. But I didn't give her any reason to confront me. Not yet. Patience had always been my secret weapon. I spent the next hour moving behind the bar, watching the people who had mocked me, laughed at me, or dismissed my ambitions. One by one, I cataloged their expressions, their movements, the way they reacted to the other employees. A man who used to complain about his drink's temperature constantly wiped his hands on his jeans nervously as he waited. Maddie's friend, the one who had started the rumor about me last year, checked his phone compulsively, glancing around the room like he was searching for a warning sign. I observed them all quietly, letting their uncertainty grow without a single word from me. It was a strange kind of satisfaction, watching the tide shift without lifting a finger. When I finally knew the moment was right, I stepped back into the center of the bar and set the folder down with a deliberate, commanding motion. The sound of the folder hitting the wood was louder than I expected, like a starting gun echoing through the room. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Every movement paused. Maddie froze, her rag suspended in midair, eyes wide as she realized my hands weren't empty. She must have known, deep down, that something significant was happening, but nothing could have prepared her for this. I cleared my throat, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Then I spoke. "I have an announcement," I said, my voice calm, steady, and deliberate. "I am now the owner of Mason's Tap House." The room went still, and for a moment no one breathed. Maddie's jaw tightened, and I could see the flicker of disbelief cross her features. Some of the regulars muttered, their words trailing off as they processed the revelation. The coworker who had started the rumors looked like he might fall off his stool. A faint murmur passed through the room, but I didn't respond to it. I let the words hang in the air, letting the weight of them settle on every shoulder. Then I pulled out the signed documents and placed them on the counter for everyone to see. The ink glinted under the overhead lights, a testament to the legality, to the permanence of the change. Every eye in the room shifted from me to the folder and back again, as if trying to reconcile the person they had mocked with the person now standing in absolute control. "I know this might come as a surprise," I continued, voice even and controlled, "but this change is real. I am in charge now, and I expect this place to be treated with respect. Not just for me, but for every person who works here and every customer who walks through that door." I could see the tension in Maddie's shoulders as she leaned against the counter, her mouth opening and closing without sound. I didn't rush her. I let her squirm a little. It was only fair. For months she had taken every opportunity to undermine me, to spread rumors, to make my work feel invisible. Now the tables had turned. I am not here to punish anyone for past mistakes, I said, lifting a hand to quell the stirrings of whispered speculation. But I will not tolerate disrespect, gossip, or behavior that undermines the dignity of this establishment. That ends now. A low murmur ran through the staff, and one of the more senior bartenders glanced at me nervously. I could see the calculations in their eyes. Who stays? Who goes? I had already made my decisions privately, and now it was time to act. I called the coworker who had started the rumors aside, speaking to him in a quiet, private corner. The conversation was firm, precise, and unemotional. I told him that his position was no longer tenable, that the actions he had taken were unacceptable, and that he would not be returning. He left with a mixture of anger and disbelief, muttering under his breath, while I returned to the center of the bar. The others, however, were given clear instructions and expectations. I wanted to set a tone of fairness, not cruelty. They were told that their roles were secure, that they would be supported, and that the work environment would now be built on respect and collaboration. A few of them visibly relaxed, some even nodded with cautious gratitude. The transformation was subtle but immediate. The atmosphere in the bar had shifted, the energy no longer oppressive but charged with a sense of accountability and possibility. Once the immediate shock settled, I took a moment to move through the bar, observing the reactions of each person individually. Maddie avoided my gaze but kept busy cleaning glasses, her movements a little too precise, a little too careful. I knew she was watching me as much as I was watching her. That subtle acknowledgement was enough for now. The rest of her understanding would come in time. I took a deep breath and let myself enjoy the rare quiet of authority. Not the loud, performative power that people think comes with ownership, but the quiet, grounded confidence that comes from taking control of your own life. The bar felt different under my gaze. Lighter, more open, more capable of being a place of dignity and pride. I could imagine the laughter here without malice, the customers treated with respect, the staff working as a team. That vision felt tangible, like the first sunlight after a long, harsh winter. By mid-afternoon, I had begun implementing subtle changes. New schedules, clear expectations, and a reorganization of the space itself to make it more efficient and welcoming. Every action was measured, deliberate, and thoughtful. I could sense the shift in energy as people responded to the fairness and decisiveness of leadership that they hadn't seen before. And yet, the most satisfying moments were the quiet ones. The fleeting glances from employees who had once doubted me, the way Maddie finally looked up without her smirk, the subtle nod from a regular who had teased me relentlessly. Each gesture was a silent acknowledgement that the world had changed, that the girl they once mocked was no longer at the mercy of their cruelty. By the time the evening rolled around, I stood behind the bar, watching the space transform from chaos to order. I poured drinks with ease, smiled at customers, and kept the staff coordinated without raising my voice unnecessarily. Every movement, every word, every glance carried the unspoken message. Respect is earned and now it is mutual. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The satisfaction came quietly, steadily, in the knowledge that I had reclaimed something more valuable than ownership. I had reclaimed my self-respect, my dignity, and my place in a world that had once sought to minimize me. And in that moment I realized that the day I walked back in as the person they never expected had not just been about proving them wrong. It had been about proving to myself that I was capable, deserving, and unstoppable when I finally took control of my own life. The first night after officially taking over the bar, I stayed late long after the last customers had gone. The hum of the neon sign outside buzzed faintly, flickering in soft shades of amber and white against the windows. I leaned against the counter, listening to the quiet. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels earned through every ounce of struggle, every hour spent being laughed at, ignored, and underestimated. And now, for the first time in years, it felt like it belonged to me. I walked through the space slowly, tracing my fingers along the smooth wooden edges of the bar. The scent of polished wood mixed with the faint traces of spilled beer and lemon cleaner. Everything looked familiar, yet entirely different. I wasn't just a bartender anymore. I wasn't just Liza who got mocked and whispered about. I was the person in charge, the person who made the decisions, the person who controlled the destiny of this place. And somehow it felt like the first breath of freedom I'd ever truly taken. Pulling out my phone, I sent a quick message to my mother. "It's finally done. I did it, Mom." Her reply was almost instant. "I knew you could. I'm so proud." I smiled, a warm weight settling in my chest. It wasn't just about ownership. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above ridicule and reclaim my life. The first few days as owner weren't easy. Every decision, from inventory orders to scheduling shifts, reminded me of the responsibility I had carried silently for so long. Yet I approached it differently than I might have in the past. I didn't let the sting of past humiliation guide my actions. I let fairness, clarity, and intentionality do the talking. When I walked through the doors, it wasn't to punish anyone. It was to create a space where dignity was no longer optional. Maddie, for her part, had been quiet. Watching her adjust to the reality of the new order was fascinating. The arrogance she once carried into every interaction now seemed brittle, like it could crack at any wrong move. I didn't gloat, didn't taunt. I simply gave her instructions clearly, expected her to meet them, and held her accountable. Over the course of the first week, I noticed a shift in her attitude. Not dramatic, not instantaneous, but subtle, deliberate. She began to show signs of respect, realizing that her previous position of control no longer existed. I also made a point to speak to my staff individually, privately. I wanted them to understand that this was not a vendetta. I didn't care about revenge. I cared about respect and about creating an environment where everyone could perform their best without fear of humiliation. Some employees were hesitant at first, unsure whether I would use my authority punitively. But over time, the sincerity of my approach became clear. They saw that I was calm, deliberate, and consistent, not reactive or vengeful. And slowly they began to trust me. One evening, I stayed behind after closing and went through the old ledgers. As I flipped the pages, I saw records of my early shifts, tips, and complaints. Every note felt like a piece of my past self that I could now examine without shame. I realized how much I had learned during those years of struggle, the knowledge of customer habits, the efficiency of multitasking, the careful observation of human behavior. All of it, everything I had endured, had prepared me to be exactly where I was now. With that realization came a surge of determination. I wanted this bar to be more than a business. I wanted it to be a community, a place where people felt seen, where staff felt supported, where laughter could exist without cruelty. I thought about how I had once been the one mocked, and I knew I could create something entirely different for others. It wasn't just ownership of a physical space. It was ownership of culture, respect, and dignity. I also began to make small, meaningful changes to the bar itself. New menus, subtle design tweaks, brighter lighting in some areas, softer music, a cleaner, more organized back bar. But beyond aesthetics, I introduced a system of regular feedback sessions with staff, offering opportunities for professional growth and personal input. I encouraged them to bring their ideas to the table, to contribute to the atmosphere in ways that mattered. And slowly, the energy in the bar began to shift. The laughter that had once mocked me became lighter, more genuine. The space itself started to feel alive with possibility. One afternoon, I met with a longtime regular, an older woman named Mrs. Harlan, who had always quietly supported me when others mocked me. She leaned across the counter and whispered, "You've changed this place already. Feels different, lighter. And it's because of you." I smiled, feeling a lump in my throat. "I just want it to be a place where everyone feels like they belong," I said softly. She nodded, eyes glistening. "And that starts with you." It struck me then that ownership wasn't just about business. It was about responsibility, about setting an example, about reclaiming my life piece by piece and offering others the chance to do the same. Some challenges came unexpectedly. A supplier made a mistake with an order, sending the wrong stock in a critical week. I stayed late one night, calling, negotiating, and sorting everything out personally. It was exhausting, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Each obstacle wasn't a punishment. It was a test, and each resolution felt like proof that I was capable. There were also moments of introspection. Alone in the office, I sometimes reflected on the young Liza who had hidden in the storage room, crying after another day of ridicule. That girl had been vulnerable, fragile, and unsure of her worth. But I had survived, and in surviving I had grown. Owning the bar was not only about commanding the space physically. It was about reclaiming the emotional and mental territory that had been stolen from me by years of neglect and mockery. With time, the transformation became visible. Staff who had been tense and defensive began working with confidence. Regulars noticed the change in atmosphere, leaving comments about how welcoming and organized the bar felt. Maddie, now a reliable and diligent employee, came to me privately one afternoon. "I didn't realize how much I was holding back respect," she admitted, a rare moment of humility. I simply nodded. Change takes time, and acknowledgement is the first step. I also reconnected with parts of my personal life I had neglected. With evenings now more predictable, I could see my friends more often, check in on my mother, and even begin researching ideas for a small expansion, perhaps a side cafe in the back. Owning this bar allowed me the freedom to live fully, not just survive. One memorable night, as the bar hummed with laughter and conversation, I watched a young server, new, eager, and nervous, hand a drink to a table of college students. They laughed, but it wasn't cruel. It was friendly, playful, lighthearted. The server looked up at me nervously, and I smiled warmly. She had seen the previous environment, the mockery, and now she was experiencing the culture I had worked so hard to create. I realized then that my journey was no longer just my own. It was a blueprint, a legacy of dignity, resilience, and respect. I also took care to honor my own journey in small personal ways. I placed a framed photo of my father behind the bar, next to a small note reminding me that he had always believed in my potential. I kept a journal by the office window, writing down decisions, reflections, and moments of growth. Each night I would read a few lines reminding myself that owning this space was more than financial. It was deeply personal, a testament to the strength I had cultivated over years of adversity. Months passed and the bar flourished. Not in flashy, high-profile ways, but in ways that mattered. Consistent business, loyal staff, and a welcoming, respectful atmosphere. I had achieved what I had once only dared to dream. And in achieving it, I realized the most important lesson. Ownership is not about control over others. It is about mastery over yourself. The feeling of walking into the bar now was entirely different. I no longer felt the sting of mockery or the weight of past humiliation. I felt grounded, steady, and alive. Every corner of the space reflected my values: fairness, diligence, and resilience. The bar was a living testament to my journey from being laughed at to being respected, not just by others but by myself. Late one evening, as I counted the till and prepared to close, I paused and looked around. The lights glinted off the polished surfaces. The staff were chatting quietly, relaxed. The last customers waved goodbye with smiles. I leaned against the counter, letting the quiet settle around me like a soft cloak. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel entirely content. I had bought more than a bar. I had bought a chance to reclaim my identity, my dignity, and my dreams. I had turned ridicule into motivation, mockery into a lesson, and obstacles into stepping stones. I was no longer just surviving. I was living fully and deliberately, in a life I had carved for myself. And in that moment I understood. The bar had been a starting point, but what I truly owned now was my life. Every choice, every moment, every future decision belonged to me. I had stepped out from the shadow of their laughter, and now the world belonged to the version of me that they never expected, and that I had always hoped to become.